have confirmation that the stream is beginning. If the passengers would please return your seats and trays to their locked and upright positions, the ship is preparing for takeoff. Good afternoon, folks. This is a little pre-show run-up. I'm actually going to cut the stream in just a moment after I deliver a brief message. And of course, this is also part of our usual pre-show check to make sure everything is working properly. So, it appears to me that there may have been, in the past week, an event of some kind that many folks are quite clued into, and some happy with, and some rather upset with. And so, because of this particular event, I'm not entirely sure what happened, I'm going to be giving a brief, quick little message that is in regards to what we're doing here and what we would like to see out of the folks hanging out with us. And it's kind of what we expect, but it's been brought to our attention that we should probably just say something just so it has been said, because yada, yada, yada. So, without further ado, say a brief message on behalf of the folks at CGBytes. We know right now might be a stressful time for some folks in the stream, but we ask that there be no political discussion in the chat today. And instead, let's just try to have fun, learn, talk about what's brought us all together, that being our passion for this art and this art form. And I would just like to personally add to that message. I mean, that is, that is sort of an official sort of statement from CGBytes, and I would just like to concur with that I absolutely agree with that sentiment. I know a lot of folks who are very upset, and a lot of folks who are very who are not, who maybe have celebrated. I know so many people on both sides of that entire situation, and I personally am of the mind that we should focus on what it is that we do that makes the world a better place. Simply, that's all. And what we do that makes the world a better place, what we as people who are here do, is we make art. We share our imaginations. We create. We put things out that didn't exist before we did them. And so today, we want to ask that everybody take a good deep breath and just forget for a couple of hours any differences, divisions, frictions, disagreements on stuff, and be cool. That's kind of my general rule for life anyway. Let's just be cool, So, that said, I'm going to kill the stream for a moment so that this is not at the beginning of the video for the rewatch, because it's just kind of awkward. But I hope everyone can agree on that. Let's all just be cool. Let's be cool. Let's create things, and let's put our energy in what really, really matters, and that is creating and being good to each other. So, that said, I'm going to kill the stream for just a moment, and I shall be right back. All right. Good afternoon, mi amigos and compadres. We have just a couple minutes before this shindiggy-doo gets on the road. All right. 2 minutes and counting. 2 minutes and counting. 2 minutes. Never start the show. Feeling kind of goofy. Yeah. bass and falsetto. Right. 1 minute and counting. Where was I? That's where I was. All right. Have to refresh myself for a moment, and probably about 30 seconds left. You like that? You like the me and my little falsetto? That's so goofy. Every once in a while. Don't make me break into some. Oh crap! What's his name? Curtis Mayfield. I'll start singing some Superfly. We'll get it on in here. Yeah. Break down some Superfly. Pass around some shots of Courvoisier. Whip out some old Al Green. All right. It is 1 o'clock, and we are doing it. So, welcome back to another installment of our ongoing series of artist development seminars brought to you from the good lovely folks at CGBytes, the one-stop shop for all your poser and dash studio needs, CGBytes. So for those who may be first-time attendees or folks who are watching this in the rewatch, my name is Les Garner. I'm from 6S1 Media. I'm also the Director of Artist Development at CGBytes. And the purpose of the seminars and the series is to take my experience and skills and share them with either fledgling or up-and-coming or even seasoned artists, who knows? I mean, there's probably a little bit to share with everybody in there, and to help folks just develop their skills and become better at what we do with 3D art, particularly in the realm of the 3D content market, specifically for Dash Studio and Poser. So the seminars up to date have all pretty much focused on development with Zbrush, and that's where we're staying in right now. This is another installment in a series that I'm doing that's a fully realized character development. And if you haven't been with us up to this point, just a quick recap. The purpose of this series is to show you a fully developed character, not just in terms of shape and skin, texture, things like that, the way that a lot of folks in the content world might think of it, but actually fully realized concept development from sketches all the way to completion in the form of full outfits, props, a character sculpt, all of the stuff that goes into making a fully realized character. Really trying to kind of bridge a little bit of the divide that kind of exists between what we do in the content world and the other side of what I do professionally, which is work in things like games and film and broadcast and those areas. Because as someone who has been kind of in both worlds for a very long time, I see that there's actually a great deal of value to be had in approaching what we in the content market do in some of the same ways that we would in film or gaming. So that said, that's kind of a quick overview of what's come before, and you are highly encouraged to go back and catch the rewatches. I know some of the videos can be rather long because these are live seminars, and once we get rolling, things just kind of tend to take on themselves, take on their own life, and sometimes, there's a lot of information to share. But I would highly encourage going back, rewatching. Maybe I know that you can place bookmarks in YouTube videos. Maybe watch a little bit, bookmark, and then go back and watch it again later. we're sharing a lot of information, especially in the course of this particular series, of seminars. So anyway, where we are at this point, last week we covered setting up the Genesis figures, G3 Mail, for polypaint. We covered a number of aspects of polypainting and the setup for that inside Zbrush. We talked quite a bit about what polypaint is. We went over a number of things regarding the UVs that you find on the Genesis figures, and we discussed the UDIM UV layout format that DAZ has adopted, which I am a huge fan of. I'm really glad they did that. So we covered a lot of ground. This week we're going to complete the texture set and sculpt that we started last week, and we should be able to get our shape moved over to DAZ Studio today and applied as a morph and save that out. We should also be able to get our textures saved out and applied inside DAZ Studio, and then maybe add a few other little nifty tricks on top of that that I'm going to save for later. So that I'll get into probably in the second half of today's session. So that's where we are. Before I jump into the thick of things and start, slinging polys and paint, I'm going to take a quick look at the chat while I get a quick shot of my coffee and see if anyone has any questions or comments so far. All right, so looks like we got a few folks joining us today. That's cool. It's good to see all you guys in the chat. And folks who aren't in the chat, hey, you're more than welcome to. It's all good. So let's jump on in. Here I have loaded the figure from where we were working last week on our textures, and we needed to do some output of those textures. And the way that I like to output the textures for a Genesis figure is going to be using the multi-map exporter. So we do have a couple of things left that I didn't touch on last week, and I do recall that I went over, that I kind of previewed this a little bit, and I've had some questions about it, is why didn't I do the eyelashes and eyes at the same time as everything else, since I have it all together. The reason that I always choose to do it this way, I'll do all the skin, but I'll leave out the eyelashes and eyeballs. This actually goes also to a set of questions that I've had outside of seminar from a number of folks working on products and things, which is really cool, working on their own little projects that they've built, that they've started building based on things they've learned here, and that's cool. I love seeing that. But when you're poly painting, okay, we subdivide mesh, and here we have this subdivided up to 17 million polygons. And while that's a lot of poly count, which gives us plenty of vertices to have color for all of the surface and all of the skin, the interesting thing here, though, is that because the eyeballs have, they're not high resolution meshes in there, and the eyelash is the same thing. They're not high resolution meshes at the default resolution. When we subdivide those, obviously, they can only get mathematically the number of polys that's available to them. Well, if we were to look, and let me see if I can just use an example. For instance, anytime you want to have, like if I wanted to have a 1024 map of these eyelashes, I'm going to need I'm going to need at least 1 million polygons there for that to have enough resolution to give me a clean texture. So at our current subdivisions of 6 subdivision levels, our eyelashes only have 261,000 vertices present. So that's not enough resolution present to give us good textures for those. We have enough resolution present to get great textures for the rest of the figure, except for the eyelashes and eyeballs. Now, the thing is, as we painted those textures, I hope everyone took note that while I painted the textures, I also sculpted the figure. I changed the shape, and that shape is going to give us a morph. So everything we did, we painted texture and sculpted shape at the same time. We combined those two processes that I know for a lot of people have traditionally been separate processes. Most people who do this stuff in the content world will tend to sculpt their shape, alter the mesh, save a morph, and then apply textures, and they're very separated. I am a big proponent of keeping those things, of leveraging the power of Zbrush, so that we can keep those two things synchronized. It's great because as you paint those textures and sculpt together, details that are in the textures will be reflected in the sculpt. There's all kinds of ways. I can really talk about that for quite a while. There's a lot of ways that those two things being in tandem is extremely beneficial. However, as you can see here, sometimes we have areas of mesh that even when we're subdividing and we go, well, our whole model is at 17 million polys, still, that's across the whole model, and the distribution of polygons is proportionate. And you can't really get more shoved into just these, unless we went into HD geometry, and that's a whole other thing. It's kind of a nightmare sometimes. I really try to avoid using that, which is why I'm not going into that here. So we could have broken these off from the mesh, from the rest of the figure, and subdivided them separately, which would be fine for creating textures, but that would have removed their vertices from the overall model, thus changing the vertex count and making us incapable of using the sculpting we did then as basis for a morph. So since I want those things to remain in tandem, I leave all this, even if I'm not going to texture these parts directly in this in this model's subdivisions. So all that to say, all that is explanation for where I'm going to go next, which is how I would go through and texture these areas that do have too low a resolution for us to do at this point. So I'm going to reduce my subdivisions at the moment just for ease of selection, and turn on my polyframe so that I can see what I'm doing very clearly. And I'm going to duplicate my subtool, okay? I'm going to duplicate this. So here I have Control-Shift-D as my key command for duplicating a subtool, or we can just hit this button, and it will create a duplicate of the subtool with subdivisions. Everything's intact. This duplicate is what I'm going to use to do my eyelashes and eyeballs. So I'm going to hide everything except the parts that I want to texture. And then I'm going to go into my Modify Topology tab under Geometry. And I have all these subdivisions on. I'm going to keep those, but delete hidden. And when I hit delete hidden, it's going to try to reconstruct the subdivisions with the mesh that's remaining. So let's hit that, and we'll give that just a moment and see what we get. So, and when you do that, it can take it a minute, so just be patient. So here we are now. We have just the eyeballs and eyelashes. And if we bring that up to subdivision of 6. We see that all of those together are 1,000,000 polygons. And we might want to separate this even further. So I'm going to go back down to my lowest subdivision. And let's go to our polygroups. Now remember, I talked last week about UDIM, UDIM, and the UV layouts that are UDIM format, and how in Zbrush we can use that as a tool in our grouping and polygrouping for organizing our work. So here I'm going to hit UV groups, and now when I select a polygroup, we can see that we actually have 3 different UDIM tiles represented here. So I'm going to split these by groups now, and that's going to give me separate subtools based on those polygroups. So if I go into subtool, split, group split, hit OK. Now it should split those out. And you'll see now we have a subtool for each of those UDIM-based groups. And each one should have subdivision. So now we can see very granularly, try saying that 5 times fast, granularly, we can see in a very granular way the meshes that correspond to these different maps that we'll need. Now we can subdivide each of these up as high as needed to get the resolution we want to have a nice tight texture for each of those maps. Now I know that some of what I just went over might be a little confusing because I know like you're not actually seeing a lot happen except, oh, I'm just kind of organizing some things into these subtools. So I'm going to take a quick glance over at the chat for a second, and I want to make sure that I'm trying to be a little more interactive today, maybe than in the past, because I know some of this stuff maybe doesn't have immediate visual feedback on screen, and so I want to try to make sure that everyone is kind of getting it as I go. So I'm going to take a quick look at the chat and see if anyone has any questions, or right now would be a great time to fire off any if you have them. So, and I also typed, just a call for questions at the moment, just so, because I know that when I type in the chat, it shows up before my audio actually hits the stream. Okay. So I'm going to move along then. It doesn't seem like we have any questions on this. That's good. I'm glad it seems to be pretty clear to everyone. So I'm going to move forward now with this texture. We're going to reduce our reduce our subdivision, or go to a lower subdivision. Now I'm going to auto group, and here you can see when we auto group that, we'll have these groups remaining. And then I'm going to merge similar groups. This is going to let me paint, for instance, the pupils, or just the iris, or just all of this eyeball. This particular subtool is going to give us the core of our eye texturing. So I'm going to run that up. Right now we're at 6 subdivisions, and that's 395,000 polys. So let's subdivide that again to 1.5 million. And we could probably go up one more. I'm not sure I really need to go higher than this for a set of eyes. So what I'll do is go ahead and bring in a texture resource that I have that has some nice eye textures already in it, and apply that, which will kind of also give you a nice recap of how to apply your own pre-existing textures into the polypaint. but that will also give us a nice jump start, and I can and an opportunity to look at ways that you can see look for things in the polypaint that can tell you whether you need to subdivide again or not. So I'm going to be pulling from my Simply Human Natural Male product, which is a resource. If anyone wants to snag that, you're more than welcome to use it for your own products. Use all kinds of things out of it. So let's grab that, and then I will go into Texture Map and turn that on. And also in Zbrush, texture maps, anything that has pure black, that black can be read as transparent. So if we turn up this slider, you can see transparency show through. So from here, I want to go to Polypaint. I'm going to turn on RGB and hit Polypaint from Texture. And then I just want to take a quick look at each of my groups. And if I saw a lot of blurring in this, then I would probably want to go up a subdivision level. This looks pretty good to me. I'm happy with that. And so now from here, I can go ahead and do some work on building my own, building a new texture into this, painting a new texture in. And there are some really nifty little tools inside ZBrush, some ways that you can use different facets of the brushes that I'm going to show you. And by all means, make sure that you take time to experiment with this stuff in other ways. There's lots of different ways this stuff can work for you beyond just painting eyes. So make sure that you take time to experiment and play around with these techniques because they can be really handy elsewhere. So I'm going to take a standard brush. I'm going to change my stroke on that to a spray. And let's go into alpha, and we'll take alpha 58 is not bad. Has these kind of wavy, jagged lines. And I'm going to turn the Z add off, and then we'll go into our brush menu and go down to auto masking, and we're going to set that all the way, mask by polygroups, all the way to 100, so that it will only affect whichever polygroup we click on first. So if I begin to place a stroke on this polygroup, it won't affect this. It's automatically masking the others. So I'm going to turn on symmetry, and let's pick up some color from here and just start building out a little bit more. Let's look for kind of a green. And you notice the way that I'm picking up that color is I'll just click on my color swatch over here and then drag the picker anywhere on my screen. Anywhere on my screen, it's going to grab whatever color is under my mouse as I'm holding it. And then when I let up, that's what I'll get. So now, I'm going to turn my RGB down, relatively low. And at this scale, I'm going to hold shift and click on where it says dynamic on my draw size so that I turn that dynamic brush size off. Okay? And then here, you can see I'm starting to spray in some of that color. And because we're using that alpha, it gets that kind of granular, that grainy sort of eyeball texture in place. And if you wanted to add some actual physical texture to the eyes, which I sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. On things like monsters, I might, so that it creates some cragginess in the eyes. But on realistic humans, I tend to leave the surfaces really smooth on the eyes so that it can stay kind of wet and smooth and shiny looking. So you might turn on Z-Add if you're doing something where you want some of that surfacing to come through. Since I don't here, I'm leaving that off. I might switch over to a different shader, like my blend shader that I use pretty frequently. And then we can also make some changes to the nature of our stroke by clicking here. We have a number of controls inside of spray. So if we wanted to have more color being dropped at once, we can turn up how much flow there is. And it's kind of analogous to, I come from a background of airbrushing. I used to do a lot of airbrush work. And it actually reminds me a lot of how you can turn up or you can increase the amount of paint that you're dropping, that you're spraying out in a lot of different ways with an airbrush. So then if we wanted, we could also incorporate some of the elements of spotlight and spotlight painting that I've shown in the past. Let's go into my, let's go into my texture resources. I'm using some resources from 3dsK. I have a ton of this stuff sitting around too. So let's see, email, good. And I'm going to go find a nice eyeball, maybe even a couple of them. And you notice I'm holding Control and clicking each of those images, and then I hit open and they'll all open into my texture library up here. Then I'll click on one of them and we'll go into Spotlight. So now I'm going to turn off my alpha, turn off spray, change that back over to regular dots, and let's increase our spotlight size, scale. And I want to alter the color of these eyes just a little bit too, just for fun. Let's take the saturation level up a bit, and then maybe adjust the hue to make them a little more green. Now I'm going to back my opacity down and hit Z, and now we're ready to paint. And I do like having that baked-in reflection you can get from eyeball photos. I like that a lot. And another interesting technique, I think, that I like to use for varying the textures in the eyes, you can see I've already created some variation from our photo just by altering the hue. Now if I alter that again, and then we'll go back and turn on our spray again, and we'll go back and pick up the alpha. Now I can spray in and combine these hues, and I'm still using the same photo source. So I'm still projecting photo data into my paint. I'm just altered the color and then projecting it right there on the fly. And we can continue with more of that, more of those kind of alterations. Let's turn up our intensity. And then let's bump the contrast. So now we can get even more variation just out of the same eye image. Okay. So now unhide everything, and if I wanted to, I could make some changes to this, to our eyeball. So let's take a look in here, and let's just paint this area. And I'm going to get rid of that alpha and go to something a little different. Still has some breakup to it, rotating around and pulling in this nice little area right here, just so that we get a little more of the veining in the back of the eyeballs. And while you may not normally see that stuff very clearly in renders, I find that it's really useful to have it there, because anything that's present, if you set up subsurface scattering in materials, having this kind of stuff present, even in areas of the mesh that may seem kind of obscured, it does play into your subsurface scattering, and it will increase your realism. Sometimes you have to fight a little bit with your angles. And I do believe we're almost where I want to be with this. There we go. So, there we have our eyeballs all textured. Then from there, I'm going to bake that into a texture map. So I'll do that by going first to my UV map menu. I'm going to set this UV map size to 4096. That way we have plenty of resolution in our image. And then in the texture map menu just below it, we'll hit New from Polypaint. And so now you can see if it would pop out. It's supposed to pop out. Should be able to like mouse over that and have it pop out. It doesn't always work. I was hoping to get a larger view of that. But here we have our texture map that we just painted. Started from a resource, added our own elements, and here we have our map. Then the next subtool that was created, oh, before I move on, I want to make sure that I name this. I'm going to call this DVX Sarge Eyeballs. So next we're going to move down to this subtool, and this is going to be the transparent elements, the wetness, the little eye wet mesh that's along the rim of the eyelid. Miss V asked about the name of the resources that I mentioned. It's pretty commonly used throughout 3D is a thing called 3DSK. They're a website that just sells large libraries of photo reference and high resolution photos that are clear for commercial and hobbyist use in what we do. So I can tell you they can be a little pricey. So there is that. In my opinion, they're a little pricey for what they offer, but it is what it is. I would encourage you to look around, do Google searches for photos. If you go to Google search and then you go to search tools, you can actually plug in there where it says license rights and look for labeled for reuse. And anything that you grab like that, if it's labeled for reuse, you're free to use it. So you can actually find a lot of great resources that way. Sometimes if I'm having a brain fart while I work and I just need a few minutes to clear my head, I might go do a Google search on something I know is coming up and go just start compiling my own pile of images to use for things that are labeled for reuse. You know, it's just a little, I don't know, it's kind of a busy work thing, but it's a good thing to do from time to time. So the next thing I'm going to do is paint my transparency elements. And these are really easy. There's a lot of different cool things you could do with these. But I'm going to start with pure black, and I'm going to flood my mesh with pure black. I'll go to color, fill object. And since I have my RGB intensity kind of low right now, I'll have to hit that a few times rather than change this. I also want to go ahead and change the background gradient range so that when I have something black like this, I can see it more clearly. So, being that these are pieces of mesh that are intended for transparency, I'm going to change my primary color to white and turn my alpha off, go back to dots, and we're still just using the standard brush, just making some little changes to it here and there. And since reflections aren't necessarily mirrored on eyes, and what we're really doing here is kind of creating some false reflections just to help, you know, give that illusion of reality. There's a number of different ways that we can do that. I'm going to turn on my polyframe so that I'm not looking at just black mesh. And then we could maybe just put a square mask over a couple of areas like this. I'm going to swing around to the back and unmask the part that projects through. Then I'll invert the mask. Oh, I almost forgot. Caught myself here. We need to subdivide this up over 1,000,000, which one more subdivision will do it, so that we have enough resolution to get crisp textures. So now let's make a little mask. And these little masks are going to give us sort of these fake window reflections. And swing around to the back, clear those out. I'm going to invert my masking. I'm turning my RGB intensity way down, way down. Just going to gently brush over so I see it start to come in a very light gray. And then I'll start working, I'll pick a corner and kind of work small strokes. And again, these are more just old school airbrush art tricks. But they're so handy. So there we have some fake reflections started. And if you wanted, you could also project some photo elements into those to just increase the realism level a little bit more. Then I will maybe come into the opposite side here with some pure black and just spray that in so that it fades out, like so. Then I just cleared my masking. Since there's so much black, it's hard to tell. But I'll clear my masking and then hold my shift key to go into my smooth brush, turn off Z add, and then I will use my smoothing to just blur where we blended it into black. That way we have a crisp edge out here that kind of blurs and blooms as it goes into the black. Then, just for a little variation, let's take our focal shift on the standard brush all the way down to 0. Turn our RGB up relatively high, and we'll just paint a little stroke right through here. Maybe come back with something, just some kind of randomized shapes. You're really trying to separate so that it's not symmetrical. So you're really trying to create something that has is similar in shape but not identical. You don't want it to be too perfect. And then we'll come back in with some black and use that to blend it back out. We don't really want that going completely over pupil. The River says, I thought it would be best not to bake in reflections, and Susan responded, saying these would show up very lightly in the transparency layering. Yes, that's exactly correct. The idea here is to just have a little something in there that you can use to either, okay, if you're, depending on the render engine you're using, you could actually use these and just replace, you can just have them in the transparency mapping and then have white as your default texture, and it will have sort of the illusion of having these highlights. Now with iRay, I would actually plug these into maybe the gloss or there's the thin layer settings. There's a lot of different places you could actually make use of this to enhance existing specularity that shows up in iRay. So it's funny because it's a mapping, it's a type of texturing that is kind of old school, but it still has a lot of uses. So now that we have that, I also want to make sure, I almost forgot, we also want to make sure that we add a little bit to our little wet mesh. So I'm going to go down to my lowest subdivision and auto group so that we separate those, and now I'm going to merge similar groups, and now I have these by themselves. I can turn my resolution back up, and for these I'm going to turn on symmetry so we knock them both out at once. So now with symmetry on, I'm just going to kind of paint this little thin sort of highlight. And I actually want a little more gray all the way through this. That way you get the full shape of the wetness instead of it being completely transparent at the edges. So now we have our trans mapping for the eyes. And again, I'm going to set this to 4096 and hit New from Polypaint. And here you can see our trans mapping. So there we now have our eyes textured, and the last thing remaining in our textures is going to be the eyelashes. And the process for these is going to be the same as really any poly paint. I'm going to use different, I can use different photos to project in my texture. Sometimes I'll actually paint completely fresh eyelash textures just using my brushes here, and I'll show you a little bit of that. I want to make sure that I subdivide once more so I get above 1,000,000 polygons. And I need to flood this with black, and then I'll paint these with white. If I'm going to paint them. Now, I'm going to paint a couple of these, but then I think I'm probably just going to bring in my resource and project that in, because I like to actually take quite a bit of time on doing eyelashes. They're very finicky. It's very hard to hand paint eyelashes and get them to look natural. So I tend to kind of labor over that, and I don't want to eat up a lot of time here today with just that. But a couple things that I would do in the process of that would be to go into my stroke menu, make sure lazy mouse is on, and turn my lazy radius up. That way I can deliver these very smooth strokes. And actually, just looking at the way those strokes are going down, I probably need even more resolution in order to get those things to be very crisp. And that's incredibly important in eyelashes. You have to be crisp. So let's subdivide that one more time to where we're at 4 million polygons. So then I would just go in very methodically. This is time-consuming stuff, so I'm not going to spend all day with it. But I would just very methodically paint in, literally paint in each eyelash. Just like that. Keeping in mind the curvature, keeping in mind how to get some nice natural variation. And I know there are probably shortcuts. Well, I know some of the shortcuts. There are a number of shortcuts you could take. We could do some different things with alphas and masking and things like that, and maybe speed it up a bit. But I actually find that a lot of the shortcuts you might run into will end up looking fake, mechanical, and you'll just end up wanting to redo the stuff. I would encourage just biting the bullet on this part, sinking the time in, painting them by hand. Or using a commercially redistributable texture resource, like we're about to do. Yeah, River says, wow, that's going to take a long time, and it is. That's why I'm kind of driving that home, that yeah, it takes a long time. My suggestion to everyone in doing this is block aside for yourself an hour sometime. It takes about an hour to paint eyelashes and get them looking really sweet. Block yourself about an hour sometime and just break off a copy of the eyelashes, paint yourself a set of lashes, save it, and then reuse it. Paint yourself 2 or 3 sets and reuse them. That way you've got some different ones. Just block some time, do them, and then make them your own texture resources that you have, that you made, and then you can go back to them anytime. So, for the sake of brevity, I'm going to go load in my texture resource. Where did it go? Where did it go? Where did it go? There it is. Here are my lashes for this. Set my UV size to 4096. We'll load those on here. And if I turn up my transparency, there you can see how those play out. So let's just go ahead and bake those in. So we'll hit polypaint from texture, and there we have that. And then I might come back over some of this just to give it some variation. There we go. Sometimes I find that my Wacom might, like as Zbrush quick saves, my Wacom might kick off its pressure sensitivity, and it will take it a minute or two for that to come back. I'm not entirely sure why that happens, but it's just a little glitchy thing that I run into, and so I thought I'd mention it because it just happened for a second. So they're just adding a few little variations. and we have our lashes. So, get new from polypaint. Now that's going to be in our mapping. So now we have all of our textures on the figure, plus we have eyeball textures, eye transmap textures, and eyelashes. So now let's save out the maps from the models that we broke off, from the elements that we broke off into their own subtools, being the lashes, eye trans, and eyeball. So we're going to save these out. These don't need normal maps. You could, and there's an argument to be made for some detail that can add. But since it's on transmap surfaces, it's probably not going to add that much unless you're just zoomed in where you've got, you know, a 4096 square image of just the eye. You're probably not ever going to really need that. So I'm going to clone this texture. And actually, before I save this out, this is a good time to go ahead and set up our folder structure for this character set. Okay, and here I'm using the term character set in the more familiar way that most of the folks in the content market will use it. Character set meaning a shape and a texture. So we're gonna hop out of Zbrush for the moment, and I'm going to go to my folder where I've been working on all of this dark void stuff. And just a quick plug, because we should. I'm really proud of the work that we've done on this. You know, this is the designs that I'm doing in this series are for concepts that are part of the Dark Void product line from CGBytes. And if you folks haven't checked that stuff out, I highly encourage you to go give that a look. That's been something that we've been steadily rolling out over the course of this past year. And I really love the way that it came out. There's a number of environments, a bunch of clothing kits. There's a monster in there that is probably one of my favorite monsters I've ever created, called the Amalgamate. God, that thing's so nasty. I'm sorry. Thinking about it, it's such a nasty beastie. But anyway, if Terry or Loki would, if you guys want to pop a link to any of that stuff in here, since this is all part of that series, I think that'd be cool, because just so folks can take a look at it, kind of see what we're in the stylistic vein of right now. So anyway, back to the task at hand. We are going to build our folder structure for the Sarge. That's what I'm calling this. I'm labeling this texture right now, Sarge. So I have a pre-made set of folders that I use to jumpstart. And you can see here I have a zip even. It's called product template. And what I will do is make a folder now that I'm calling DVX Sarge, and I'm placing all of these folders in there. Now, some of these you don't have to place in manually, like Data Studio will create for you. Documents is one that you'll want to have on hand for the point when you come to bundling up a product to upload to CGBytes. Because inside documents is where you'll put your readmes and any other pertinent information about a product. So I have a folder in mind called Figures, because at 6S1 we do a lot of completely original figures from the ground up. And so I keep those categorized under Figures, and then our studio name 6S1. There's all kinds of things that come up under that. So for the purpose of this set, we don't need that, so I'm going to delete that. You'll have a folder called People, and since we're working for Genesis 3 male, I'm going to replace female with male. And then under that, you'll have accessories, clothing, hair, poses, props. These are all things that are common, the common elements, and this is the structure in which people are used to seeing those things come up in Dash Studio. So here we're just doing a character set morph texture. So I'm going to delete really all of these and add a folder called characters. And I'll probably have to double check that here in just a second. Actually, right now is a good time to do that. Let's double check and look at some other products, some other things that that use this this structure. So let's see, people, now. Let's see. Pardon me if I kind of stumble around for just a minute here. People. Characters, here we go. This is, I have a lot of directories in here, so bear with me for a second. So here we go. So yeah, we'll have under Genesis 3 Mail, we'll have a folder called Characters. I was just double checking myself. I wanted to make sure that I was right there. And then we'll have materials, and under materials, I'll put the name of the character. So, new, materials. And if you have a template for your folders, the way I do, you can tell I don't do a lot of these kind of products, so I don't have those things normally in my template, but you might want to add them to your own. So I'm going to place a folder under materials called DVX Sarge, and then under characters. Under characters, I don't need any subfolders because that's just where I'm going to save out my DVX Sarge. Okay. And I'm curious because I already have a folder in here called DVX Sarge. I just want to make sure. Okay, cool. So, also in your folders, you'll have a runtime, textures, and inside that is where you'll place all your textures that you save out. Okay. And here in DVX Sarge, I do believe I may have already saved out last week a character set for that. Let's take a look. Here we go. Yes. There we go. So I already have our base sculpt baked in, which we sent over from Zbrush through the GoZ plugin. So here we already have our shape baked in. If you remember last time, here in our mesh, you can see that we have, just a moment, you can see, you know, we had set a pose with the mouth open, and we had done some things like that so that we could get to those hard to reach places. I need to undo that. And then we had those elements reversed out so that we could send it and still be able to have those changes propagate. So the next thing that we need to do is save out our textures. Now we have all our directories set up. So I'm going to go to the eyeballs, scroll down to where my texture map sits, hit clone texture, and I'm going to go to export. And I want to make sure that I'm going into the right directory here. The DVX Sarge. Here we go. Runtime textures, CGBytes, DVX Sarge. And this is going to be DVX Sarge eyeballs. And I label everything using the file suffixes and labeling that you find native to Zbrush. And I'm going to attempt to use the JPEG export here. Sometimes it doesn't work, and if it doesn't, then we'll just do a conversion. But we're going to try it, and we're good. So I can hit enter, and now we have a JPEG for the eyes. So next I'm going to go down to the eye trans, clone it, and I just hit the down arrow to go down in my subtools. So to clone it, export, and then we're just going to call this DVX Sarge eye trans. Actually, let's call it eye spec, because that's more appropriate to what it is now. And save that out. And last, we will clone our eyelashes, export. And this is going to be DVX Sarge eye lashes. So now we have all of our eye elements saved out. We can go back to our main figure subtool and hide all of the other ones because we don't need to see those anymore. And at this point, I'm going to hit my multi-map exporter, and that's going to save out a number of maps. It's going to save them. I have mine set up to save in TIFF. So let's take a look inside the multi-map exporter. This thing is incredibly handy, by the way. And at some point, I plan to do some little pickup videos that that go into much deeper detail of some really nifty tricks you can pull using multi-map exporter, because you can actually use it to export and combine textures from multiple subtools in some really cool ways. So we don't need that here. But I do want to briefly explain, going back all the way to the beginning of working with polypaint that we were talking about last week, going back to the discussion of UV coordinates and the UDIM standard that is incorporated here. Part of the beauty of that UDIM standard and having those UVs moved into their own tiles is that we can use multi-map exporter to export all the different maps for this one mesh at the same time, because those are separated in that way. So this model, you know, the Genesis figure has multiple maps that it uses. Those maps are broken off into their own UDIM tiles, and because of that, instead of having to separate this or hide things and export a piece at a time, a piece of our, a map at a time, we can use multi-map exporter to export all of them at once. So I'm going to go ahead and set some settings in here, and then while that's baking out, I'm going to look over at the chat and see if there are any questions and kind of field some of that while I let this bake, because it can take it a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and hit 4096 to set my map size on everything. I'm going to leave my map border set to 5 pixels. What that is a bit of overpaint past the UV shells. Let's take a quick look inside our export options. And if we go to file names, you'll see I've left the defaults in here. So texture maps, if you notice, most of my texture maps will have the name. They'll have S1M, that's our studio prefix for 6S1 Media. They'll have S1M followed by a name, product name, and then they'll have underscore TXTR. I've borrowed that direct from Zbrush. So TXTR is for texture, DM is for displacement map, NM is for normal map, so on and so forth, like you see right here. And then here, it has UV tile ID format. And there, an interesting thing there is we can define the UV tile, the UDIMs, which I rarely ever mess with that. But if we were working, like I know sometimes working with other folks, I'll bounce back and forth between Zbrush and Mudbox. And Mudbox has a slightly different implementation of the UDIM standard. So one way that we can treat that is by changing this inside here. This whole other thing probably doesn't really relate to anybody here at the moment, so it's just kind of an aside. So all of my settings are correct in here. I want 16-bit TIFF and 8-bit TIFF. The 16-bit TIFF format is going to give me 16-bit displacement maps. I can use those if I want. I don't actually use those very often. Most of the time, I bake my my displacement maps down to 8-bit and go with JPEG for them. There's an argument that could be made that, well, the 16-bit format is higher resolution. There's a number of things about it that works really well. But the difference is so granular, and the file size is so different, and a number of things about it are so much bigger and heavier as a product that I really prefer to stick with the 8-bit JPEGs. It's just my preference. So, you know, and anytime that you know, you know, if someone asks for something at a higher resolution or at a higher bit depth, then, you know, I'm always prepared to kind of facilitate and give that. So anyway, all of these settings are correct. We'll hit OK. And I'm going to turn this button off where it says Subtools, just to be safe. Even though I don't have any of these other subtools visible, I'm going to turn that off and manually make sure everything else is hidden. So I'll have just the subtool that I want my maps for selected. I want to turn that subtools button off, because if I have that on and any other subtools are visible, then it will go through and it will export the maps for all of them. So like if I had all of his clothing in here and I wanted to export maps for 10 different pieces of clothing and the figure and the eyes and the eye trans and the eyelashes, and you see where this is going, then I could use Multimap Exporter and actually just tell it to do all of them at once and just walk away and let it spit out those files. It's very handy that way. So I'm going to turn that off. I only want my normal and texture on this. I'm not even going to use displacement on a skin like this. I'm going to set, again, make sure that I'm set to 4096, map border of 5 pixels, and we will hit Create All Maps, and when we do, we're going to browse for a folder, put it in, and I'm just going to leave the default name because we'll end up changing all of those names eventually anyway. Pardon me. And I'll hit Save. So now while that is baking, you're going to see the screen change as it tells us what it's doing. And I'm going to glance over at the chat and field some questions, maybe discuss some things a little bit while we're waiting for that. So I see a question from Russell Barrett. It says, is there a benefit to the TIFF format, which Andy Rogers answers with TIFF retains way more detail than JPEG because it has a lot less compression. I do agree with that. And Terry also jumped in with TIFF is usually the file format for printing because of how it handles CMYK, which is very true. TIFF does have less compression than JPEG, and so at least in theory, a TIFF will give you a higher quality texture than a JPEG, except that if you're using uncompressed, completely 100% uncompressed JPEGs, while yes, there is a slight bit of difference between it and a TIFF, that difference is very, very difficult a lot of times to discern with the naked eye without zooming in incredibly close. So considering that most of the time these textures, these files are on a mesh, they're wrapped around, they're re-rendered, They're filtered and recompiled basically on the fly by the program. The difference between TIFF and JPEG in quality versus the bump you get in speed and performance using JPEG has led me, for the most part, to come down on the side of using JPEGs, uncompressed, like 100% quality uncompressed JPEGs as much as possible, because even an uncompressed JPEG, by virtue of its file format, is going to be much, much smaller than a TIFF. And that's going to give you a performance boost. So, and I'm very performance conscious in my work. So, if I'm checking over a product, if I'm checking over something, and it seems to me like maybe it needs a bump in that quality level, it's very rare that I find that. But if it needs it, I might go back and go with TIFF. And I tend to use JPEG most of the time, but I'm very willing to switch if need be. So that's kind of my answer for that. I wouldn't shy away from using JPEGs, though. I really wouldn't. So, other questions? Pardon me. So as we see it running through the multi-map exporter, you'll see the screen. You'll see the little notification come on screen. And when that comes up, if we look at the next one, there should be another one coming up any second now. You'll notice that it has those little numbers and underscores. What those are the markers. Those are the suffixes that denote where which UDIM tile it's saving at that point. So it's telling you, it's letting you know, okay, I'm on this tile now. Let's see here, we're on U3V0. So it's the third tile over horizontally. And of course, all of the UDIM tiles are at vertical 0. And Susan says, I save out TIFF and then save them as JPEG where I have control on how much it compresses. Absolutely, which is what I'm about to do here. Now going back to the question of JPEG versus TIFF, obviously I'm using TIFFs here because I'm saving them out from multi-map exporter. And that's going to give us very high quality TIFFs that we can save our JPEGs from. And then there's actually a utility, a free utility that I like to use. I think you can grab it from CNET. That is ABIC. It's an image converter that just allows me to do really nice, high quality batch image conversions. So I will save these out and then I'll batch convert them. Of course, you could also use Photoshop and create an auto batch in there. I actually just like the way this program works because I can just drag and drop it and I don't have to have Photoshop open. It's just really, really simple stuff. So we're on U5 V0 now, 5th UDIM tile. So, and it's just plugging right through these. So we'll give that a couple minutes. And as we are an hour and 12 minutes in, and this is baking, this is a perfect time for our sort of mid-session stretch. If anybody wants to hop up for a minute, grab yourselves a drink, take a short break, and kind of regroup a little, this is a perfect time to do that. And I'm going to do so right now, grabbing myself some coffee. So I will be back in just a moment. So as I come back, you can see all maps created and exported, and it tells you how long it took, 7 minutes, 31 seconds. So we're going to jump back in. Before I do, I'm going to take a quick look at the chat, see if there's any questions that popped up while I was gone. And looks like we're being kind of quiet today. That's fine. Hopefully it just means everyone's kind of grasping stuff and we're moving along with it. So from here, we are sort of done for the moment inside ZBrush for a bit. I'm going to hop over to my folder where it has saved the textures. And here you can see each one of these has that udim suffix to it. So, and it's kind of interesting because if you look at the default G3 figures, they actually have those suffixes I think they have those suffixes in their textures as well, which would make it look like they were done out of ZBrush. So since we did eyes, eyelashes, and eye trans separately, we don't need those. So we can look for that tag of U7, V0, U6, U5. We can look for those and know that those are unnecessary from what was saved out. They're only saved out because they were there in that mesh. And remember, we kept those present so that we could have a clean morph, a clean copy of the mesh to morph. So we're just going to select those, and they can go away. So now we have exactly the maps we need, and I'm going to open ABIC, ABIC, the Advanced Batch Image Converter, which is available on CNET. I think I mentioned that earlier. Also, just for the sake of workflow, I'm going to change the way my window works here and tell it to group by type. That way I can see my JPEGs and my TIFFs separately. And then I'm going to grab all of my TIFFs, drag and drop them into ABIC, shift, click and select them all, and I'm going to turn my compression level all the way up to 99 and hit convert. So now we have all of those images converted to JPEGs. I don't need my TIFFs any longer, so we can delete them. And you'll notice these TIFFs, these are 480 meg versus all of our JPEGs together being 49 meg. That's a huge difference. So I'm going to delete these TIFFs. Now we have all of our base Sarge textures. Okay. So now I'm back in Daz Studio, and I'm going to look at my surfaces on the G3 male figure, and we can look through our templates. Actually, if we just click on skin, we get all the skin, nails, we get the nails, so on. We can go in our templates, and I'm going to quickly color code these so that I know, because one thing they've done that I personally, I wish they would change this, is it's cool if they have these templates, so if I click on this, I'm selecting all of the materials that go with the face map. But it would be nice if it were labeled better. Just my personal thing there. So I will just go through and throw colors on each of these so that I can very clearly see which one of these they go with. After a while, you get kind of a feel for it, and you might kind of remember. But as you know, I'm only marginally smarter than the average bear. I like to make sure I give myself this little reminder. So then with all of the materials selected, and if actually if we want to see what they're grabbing, you can just click on template. If you have surfaces open, you could see that it selects them there too. But I do like having the colors there because for some reason it just makes it easier for me to think about for a minute. So now, with all of our surfaces selected, if we just click on surfaces in the surface tab, I'm going to go to scripts, and I'm going to apply my iRay Uber base. And if you don't have a script made for that yet, you can go to your DAZ 3D library and go to shaders. Where did it go? Presets. Shader presets, iRay, DAZ Uber, iRay Uber base. And you could, let's see, where was it? It's been a while since I scripted this. So, create custom action. You click that and it'll put it in your scripts the way I have it here. So if you use this a lot, which I imagine most of us will, you can right click that and create custom action, and it'll create a script from it. And the nice thing about having it scripted is if I select all these materials and I go here and I hit it, now you'll see that they're all converted to iRay. So the next thing I want to do is get my textures all in place on the figure. So let's start with template 1, and that's our base texture. So we got a base color. I'm going to browse, and then let's go to Sarge, runtime textures, Sarge, and that's going to be this texture. And once I have a texture on it, I will set the base color to white. There you can see it in our viewport. Then I'll go to my next one, which I can see is the torso textures. And I'll set that to white. And it's also not a bad time to go ahead and plug in your normal map too, since you're already browsing for maps. So let's go back to the face texture. I'll go to normal map, browse, and since normal maps are a little hard to look at, it's a good idea to just kind of judge looking at your UDIM name, since these all have the same name separated by the UDIM tile. So we know that the face is UDIM 00. Here, load that in. And it's a good idea to double check in your image editor and make sure that your gamma is at 1, which it is, so I'll accept that. So now on the, I believe this is the body, we'll go to normal map and UDIM U1V0. So we grab that map. Then next up is going to be our legs. And that's U2. You see how these each, if you notice the templates here are numbered according to those UDIM tiles. It's really quite handy the way they did that. So template 4, I'm going to go with UDIM 4, excuse me, UDIM 3. The arms, change the color white. So the number is off by 1 from the UDIM tiles out of Zbrush, but they are in order. So it's just a slight adjustment to think about. Okay. There we have arms. So next is going to be the mouth, teeth. Change the base color to white. Grab our normal map for that. Yeah. And let's zoom in on the head. So template 6 is our eyelashes, and we're going to set the base color on those to black for now. Probably will keep them there. And then in cutout opacity, I'm going to browse and grab our lashes. And I just kind of glanced over and saw Magic Bugs asks, what does gamma do anyway? Gamma is setting basically the brightness threshold of an image. And a gamma of 1 is kind of baseline. If you were to take the gamma and push it down, you're going to have a darker, more saturated image. If you raise the gamma up, it's going to become desaturated and much brighter. So that's kind of the run and gun explanation of it. Normal maps always want those things at a gamma of 1. Otherwise, because normal maps are conveying RGB interpreted data or RGB data that interprets vertex normals to the engine, the render engine, and how those normals should be rendered. If you alter the gamma of that image, you're altering the RGB. And so if you have bad gamma on your normal maps, your normals won't be rendering properly in the engine, and you can get some really bizarre situations that come out of that. So we have our lashes. Also, anything that has transparency, like lashes, I don't want transparency, or I want the transparency on them, but I don't want them to have any gloss, because that gloss will spread over the areas that should be transparent. So you would have these little hairs show up, but then you would have this highlight that spreads past them, and it's just wrong, just weird. So I will tend to set my gloss color to black and make sure that I don't have any other stuff like reflectivity, anything like that turned on at all, and I'll set my glossy layer weight all the way to 0, because I don't want any of that kind of effect showing up in my eyelashes. So next is going to be our eyes. So let's go grab those. We're going to set it to white. Now, of course, there's a trans layer over it, so when we change that, we're not really going to see it. So let's go ahead and change our trans layer. I'm going to change the base color on that to white. And I'm going to browse and grab my Sarge Eye Spec texture and put that in there. But then I'm also going to load that into my cutout opacity. Okay. And we'll come back and play with our settings for gloss and things like that on there eventually. Right now, I'm going to move the reflectivity down a little bit, and I'll make sure that roughness is at 0. So now let's go back up to template 7. That's our eyes. And you'll see here we have the sclera is involved in that. Excuse me, sorry, that was my bad. I actually needed to grab the cornea. There we go. So the cornea should get some nice high specularity, some nice high gloss settings on it. Of course, I like the fact that, you know, if we have a little bit of baked-in reflection on the actual texture too, you can, you know, it makes things look nice in the viewport. And just from my experience, it seems like customers kind of I don't know, they respond well to that. So I have kind of an on-again, off-again relationship with whether I like to do that or not, but the customers tend to respond pretty well to it from my experience. So it is what it is. So at this point, we have all our maps applied, and I'm going to turn on iRay, which hopefully will cooperate. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes iRay can be kind of finicky. But we'll give that a moment to bake. And I'm also going to go pull up some render settings for myself. I have a number of render settings already saved that I use for a lot of different things. So let's go. Something seems to be amiss. Some of my render settings. I do believe that I might need to grab. I had to recently redo my my libraries, so I believe I have a couple of my internal libraries I need to re-add. Bear with me for a second, which is fine because we'll give iRay a second to chug. See these come back. If not, we can just wing it. iRay is not being cooperative right now. I don't like that. Now, last time, or 2 weeks ago, we were using a snowscape, so I'm going to throw that in here. I might actually need to restart Daz Studio. I find that happens a lot with iRay. So let's just save this scene. And I'm going to save it right into the library where I'm working on Sarge. Save that, and I'm just going to restart the studio real quick. All right. Let's give that a second. We need to make sure that's good, that's all good. Well, that's magical. It's interesting that iRay has decided to get kind of screwy on me right now. Not at all happy about that. That's interesting. Tell you what, let's go ahead and just save out a temporary copy of these materials. Okay, so we've got Sarge. And let's delete each of these unnecessary folders. It's kind of neat that you can do that from right inside here. Just right click and hit delete. Characters, accessories, we delete that. I said we're going to delete that. So now I'm going to right click. This is from mail, create a subfolder, materials. And I want to make sure I go back and double check my my file structures again. Now let's just refresh this. Characters, materials, DVX Sarge. Here we go. So let's save out a material set from this and see if we can't get iRay to play a little more nicely. So just DVX Sarge, and I'm going to call that dev. And we're just going to save all of it together. That way we can just load our character back in here in a minute and start that all up nice and fresh. I want to give iRay a chance to chug on an empty screen, empty scene, because it is not playing nice and at a time when I really like for it. That's just magical. Just out of curiosity. That's really nice. That's really nice. Thanks. Thanks, Des. Okay. Well, that kind of puts a bit of a damper on where I was planning on going next, since iRay has decided to throw a wrench in the works. So, let us go through and try a couple of other presets and just see if that kicks anything out. Sometimes that can cause iRay to sort of jog itself. And if I can't get that working, I'm at least going to switch over and show you guys some things about saving out the morphs, saving your morph data, and getting that stuff together. And it might be that I have to come back to this at a later time after getting iRay fixed for whatever's happening to it. So I apologize for that. It was working great last night and working great this morning in my run-up as I was preparing. So that's really kind of bothersome. Really kind of bothersome. Let's just try quick. That's interesting. Now, iRay is just not rendering at all. I'm going to restart one more time. So while that is, did I turn it off and back on again? Yeah. While we're waiting for this magical moment to pass, I'll try to troubleshoot this. It's just, if anyone has any questions or things about the work that we've done so far in Zbrush, by all means, pop them off. I want to hear what you have to say and what you need. Let's see if we can't at least have some help with that. Okay, that was actually start. So let's just, and I don't, that's interesting that is not wanting to draw my dome. Yeah. Boy, that is. Interesting. Hmm. All right. Well, rather than eat up a bunch of time with trying to troubleshoot something that was working a couple hours ago, um, let's load our guy back in and just take a quick look at the materials that we saved out on him. So I'm just going to drag and drop those on there, and it should all load in. Since Data Studio is kind of, something is not right in the works here, and that's causing me to have to sort of change my plans on the fly. What I'm going to do, I have about 20 or 30 minutes left in our scheduled time, and what I'm going to show you next is something that I got a bunch of calls for last time, was to add some scars and some other morphs on top of this. So let's just go ahead and focus on that for a bit, and then I'll come back and do maybe a pickup video and share it in the Facebook group on iRay once I get this all sorted out. And when I figure out what happened, I will share the results of that. So, you know, and if there's any benefit to that, you know, I think that to what you just saw, you know, I know sometimes folks who I work with all the time have hiccups and things happen in the course of their work that are very frustrating, and it happens to all of us. So, you know, happens to all of us. So sometimes things like that come up, and we have to roll with them. So let's just move on to another aspect of this that I was hoping to share anyway. So I'm going to pop back over to Zbrush. And I'm going to relink our figure through GoZ. So I just need to reset the application that I'm pointed at. So there, we've done that. And then I'm going to hit Control G. And it's going to send that over. I actually don't want to accept anything that it sends. I just want to tell it to update an existing object, hit accept, and now I can cancel that. So now they're linked. So I want to get this shape that we've already saved out that has the mouth closed. I want to get that back over into ZBrush. So we'll just send that over. And now it should update this mesh in ZBrush. Okay. Interesting. It did not want to update that. Oh, it's probably because of the naming. Sorry. So let's just delete that. And we need to rename this. Let's see. Send this back over one more time. I want to make sure I can see what the name is as this comes over. Genesis underscore 3 mail. Which problematic. It's interesting that that Zbrush will let Dash Studios set underscores, but no other program, and it won't let you type them, can do that. That's really an oddity. I had never noticed that until just now. Send this over. Accept it. And let's just temporarily accept that as a morph. We'll end up deleting that morph out. Delete that. I'll send that back over and see if it links up. There we go. Now it's behaving. That was wonky. There we go. That's what we wanted right there. We can get rid of that uncolored gentleman there. So now we have our default shape. And we can bring up the subdivisions, and we should see how all of the high-res stuff translates into that. So I'm going to save a copy. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Sorry, I need to save this. And then after I've saved it, I'm going to save a copy of this that's going to be where we're going to add some scars. So this is going to be Sarge scars. And what this is going to end up being is another morph that will reverse out the Sarge shape. So we'll have the Sarge shape and we'll have his scar, and we can work those two things in separately if we want. So let's just hop on in here, and we will do a little bit of sculpting on our scar copy now. And I'm going to make sure I still have mask by poly groups turned up from earlier, because I'm only going to work on his face right now. So let's go ahead and add some scarring across, let's say, his right eye. And we could pull that in from references. I kind of tend to like to sculpt that sort of thing just sort of by hand. And for the sake of showing it here, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sculpt this in, taking my damn standard brush. I'm going to move the intensity down, and let's just give it a nice craggy shape. And while I'm doing this, I'm also going to add in I'm also going to add in some RGB value. So let's do just kind of a light little bit of a kind of a a muddy red-brown. I'm going to go into my brush, go down to alpha and texture, and I'm going to set that to polypaint mode 3, which is multiply. Turn my RGB on down kind of low, and then as I paint this in, you should see it dropping color in place. There we go. So you see how it's sculpting the shape, and it's also putting color data into the mesh at the same time. I'm going to turn that RGB down just a little bit. It's a little more extreme than what I really want, but so here, put this scar all the way down. And maybe turn the Z intensity up just a little bit. Trace back over that and make it nice and jaggy. Let's turn the RGB intensity down even further. I'm going to make my brush a little larger and change it to Z sub, which it's a little counterintuitive when you're using dam standard, because the Z sub will actually lift out. Or excuse me, the add should be lifting out. Duh. I-ray kind of threw me for a loop there, so now I'm a little shaken. So anyway, I can also get that by holding the Alt key. So you can see here what we're doing is working back and forth over the shape. We define the center point of it, and then I'm coming back around these areas around the outside of it. And then also, since scars tend to smooth, I'm going to set my smoothing to Z add and RGB, and I'm going to kind of smooth back over that a little bit. This. Now let's just make a slightly larger brush. I'm going to work my way down, following the outer edges here. And it's nice, like, you don't really have to be super accurate with it, because, I mean, it's a scar, so that sort of jagginess kind of plays the natural, like if your hands happen to shake a little bit, you don't really have to be all that steady-handed for something like scars. Of course, if you wanted to be, you could still turn up your lazy mouse even further too. Now let's just kind of come back down through that, a little bit of smoothing. And maybe add a couple more somewhere else, just like something across his lip. So if we're looking at a gash that's happened this way, maybe there's some other element, like a piece of machinery or something exploded, and so things are gonna big character marring details like this tend to move in the same directions. So let's continue that sort of theme here with the lip. And you see there how I kind of let the crest of the lip play into how I'm going to draw the shape. And I'm also kind of scrubbing a little bit. So I'm not just drawing that shape straight through. I'm actually kind of scrubbing back and forth with it so that it gets kind of some real jagginess built in there. Now let's work our way down the sides. And then a little bit of smoothing. The nice thing here is that since I'm working with this strictly on the face map, we don't have to output our textures for the rest of the figure. We can just save them for just the face for these kind of details. You know, we can always turn on polyframe too, just to make sure that we can see where we're at. And let's take Terry's suggestion and kind of muck up an ear a little bit too. So just maybe a little gouge. Let's make the brush a lot larger for that. I'll just kind of gouge in there and there. Turn up that RGB a bit. And maybe on this one, because we are going to morph this anyway. So let's gotta be careful using the move brush with the auto masking turned on. So I'm actually going to do this little bit on the ear at a lower resolution for a moment, and just where I can see this mesh, and kind of maul some of that with smoothing. Notice I have RGB turned off. So there he's got the mesh of that ear has been altered. And what's neat is the way that that is going to play out down into those lower subdivisions. Ah, see right there, I don't like that. I don't like that. That makes me mad. Is where I'm trying to keep this focus just on the face. The poly groups there are so tight together. You know, you've got like the ear is so tight to those other poly groups that it's going to be really difficult to do something on just the ear there and not have that flow over into that other map. So I need to be very conscious of that, very careful of it. So let's redo that. I'm going to take this all the way down to this lowest subdiv, turn on my poly frame, and I'm going to show just the face group, and shrink my selection once and mask that. Now I'm going to go up a couple subdivisions and invert my masking. Actually, before I invert it, I'm going to smooth my masking so it retracts in a bit. And now we should have a nice mask there as well. So even though I'm auto masked and it'll only work on what group I click on, I want to make sure that I want to make sure that I've protected the boundary between it and the other groups. So let's go into our masking and we'll sharpen our mask a bit. And let's grow that mask until I can see very clearly that I'm not going to affect that border area. Grow that mask. Sharpen it. And come in here and just manually paint some of that a tiny bit. A little bit more masking, just guaranteeing ourselves that we don't have to have multiple maps output from this, because this is just a small little extra set of details that makes for a nice way to punch up a character set. So now we should be able to play around with that shape a bit, and we can maul that some. Should be able to move that around a little bit more now. There we go. Now let's turn that back up. And let's add some nastiness coming through here. That down a little bit. And another neat trick, if you want to get like some crazy patterning and some jagginess with the dam standard, is to change it to a spray. So there you can see you get this kind of porous spray effect out of it that can sort of enhance that kind of feeling we're going for here. And I think I'm going to kind of continue that with the actual scar areas so that we break that skin up even more. Oh, that was a bit much. I don't know though, I kind of like it. And there it's pressing his eye in just a little too much. Not real fond of that. I'm just going to take a move brush, move that back out. Also going to store a morph target so that if I make a change here and I want to go back, I can just morph back to my previous shape. Let's also kind of heighten his pores, since this is going to be our battle-scarred version of the character. Let's go in and heighten those pores a bit. And I'm going to show a little trick here. My standard brush and some more auto masking, but a different kind. So I'm going to go into my brush. I'm going to turn my mask by polygroups. Actually, just keep that up. And I'm going to turn on cavity mask and set that up to 100. And we'll open up the curve and kind of tighten that curve in a little bit. Turn our RGB way down, and I think we should still be set to multiply. Yes, we are. So now what this should do is allow us to, let's turn off our lazy mouse. That's still on. So now that's going to allow us we actually want to set that to -100 so that this is going to spray color into the pores. So like you see here, on his chin, now we can make him seem maybe a little rougher. And we can give this feeling of kind of some dirt in these areas. So this is a technique that I'm really fond of. It's really very similar to if you've ever painted miniatures or maquettes in real life, it has an effect very similar to doing a wash. You can do a lot of subtle things with that. I don't want to spray that into the eyelash or eyebrow areas a little too much though, because it can kind of end up with some artifacting. if you're not careful, especially in areas where the colors are too similar to what you're spraying. So I like that quite a bit. And maybe let's add a little bit more shape to the scarring, just with a little bit of lifting, taking our standard brush. Let's just cause that to move out a little bit. That way in the lowest subdivision it'll be really heightened. And I also want to switch over every once in a while to my blend material, because I find that these kind of details oftentimes show up better with that. So here, now that we've got those sharp details sculpted in, I can just take my standard brush and sort of pull that stuff out, so we get this really nasty effect. You know, it feels like this guy has really had his face blown apart at some point and stitched back together. Like that a lot. So since we worked only on the face, I can hide everything except it, and now output just maps for it. And this is kind of a neat thing to have a chance to show you, because earlier we used multi-map exporter to export all of our maps at once. But you could also go through and export the maps for each section of the model individually like this, just by hiding everything else and baking the map for that particular area. So here I've done that. I'm hiding everything except the face. I'm going to set my UV map over here to 4096 and a UV map border of 5, just like I did in my multi-map exporter. Okay, so if we were to actually open that and compare, you'll see we have really a lot of the same, really all of the same sort of settings. And then here I'm going to go to texture map and I hit new from polypaint. And so now you can see we have a texture pulled from the polypaint. So let's clone that, and then we will export it. Here we go. So I'm going to rename this DVX Sarge Face Scarring TXTR, and save that out to uncompressed JPEG. And now we're going to go down to our lowest subdivision. And there you can actually get a quick look at what the texture is like in a really rough form on the lowest subdivision. You can see how your map translates out. Then we'll go to normal map. We want tangent turned on, smooth UV turned on, and smooth normals turned on. And from our lowest subdivision, hit create normal map. And we'll give that a moment. So our map extraction is completed. There you can see what that normal map sort of looks like. We'll clone that. And next we will export it. And I'm just going to click on the first map that I just saved out, so I pick up its name, and then I'll just replace TXTR with NM. So there we have that normal map. Now over in DS, okay, I have my DVX Sarge Dev materials that we already saved. So let's just rename that to DVX Sarge Queen. And then I'm going to come into my surfaces, my templates. So you see we have our face template. So now I'll just browse and replace that with scarred texture. And we'll come down and replace our normal map with the scarred normal map. And next we will unhide all of our mesh and hit Control G to send that via GoZ over to DS. And I'm going to name this DVX Sarge Face Scarring. Now, if I go to my parameters, turn that morph up, and you'll see we now have the shape corresponding to the textures, and it was all done at the same time. That's a really good illustration, actually, of the thing that I keep talking about that's so beautiful to me about polypaint, is that you're able to sculpt textural details that translate into morphs and normal maps at the same time as generating your actual texture maps. So that's a really, really cool thing, a really nice, efficient thing that you can do with that. So let's see, I need to look at my morphs, and here we have DVX Sarge. I need to look up and see where I have that saved at, because there are certain places that are sort of the standard now for where you save these things. So, let's see, people, sci-fi, real world, stylized. I'm going to put Sarge under people, fantasy, sci-fi. So let's just grab currently used, and then Sarge 1. I'm actually going to rename that to just Sarge. And then I'm going to drag that. Like I said, I'm going to drag that down into my fantasy sci-fi. People, fantasy sci-fi, there we go. And then Sarge face scarring, I'm also going to drag it. So now we have these grouped properly. And I'm going to turn both of them down to 0. Or just restore my figure. Both to 0. I want to make sure that my default settings on these are 0. My scarring, I need to set some limits on. And I'm going to save a morph asset of that. So File, Save As, Support Asset, Morph Asset, and save that into DVX Sarge. And let's double check our folder names. So data as Genesis, Mail, Morphs, 6S1, and DVX Sarge. So 6S1 is the name I have on here. Yes, that's good. And then DVX Sarge. I'm going to go in here. So then I want to save here. People, fantasy sci-fi, DVX Sarge face. And I'm going to hit accept. Now I'm going to save a material that is DVX Sarge Scarred. And so now we have Sarge Clean, Sarge Scarred, both as material settings. Now I'm going to turn up my Sarge morph and save that as a character preset. Here, go to character preset, DVX Sarge, we'll hit yes, and I want to save my shape settings and my material settings. And I also want to rename this to DVX Sarge. That way, if we load our character into the scene from the characters presets, it'll load in named properly. So let's resave that now that I've named it. Okay. And then if I wanted, I could also save a character preset for DVX Sarge Scarred. Since it's just a morph and a, well, you know, it actually doesn't take up that much space. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and apply the material. And we'll have the morph turned on that goes with it. And in characters, I'm going to save character preset, DVX Sarge Scarred. Okay. So now we have both versions of the character saved. And since our folders and everything are set up with the proper structure, this is, I would say it's ready to be distributed. It really needs a little bit of testing first, probably. So it's definitely ready to go to someone for an alpha test to look over it and double check for anything like seams and stuff like that, which really you should not find any coming from polypaint. The nature of the way polypaint works, and I've explained it before, how it translates from 3D to 2D and yada yada, all that kind of stuff. You really should not have issues with seamage, period. So that gives us a full functioning character with texture set, plus an alternate texture, plus a nice morph that goes with the alternate, you know, scarred texture. So we are, see, I have a few little things that I want to touch on in the next installment. And also, if you didn't see it, if you're not already with our Facebook group, if Loki or Terry could toss a link in for that and make sure that everyone's aware of it. I actually posted the first one last night. I'm starting to do some I'm calling them pickup videos that are just like 5 or 10 minute videos captured as I work in my day-to-day work. Because I run into lots of things that folks might not normally run into, but at some point you might. I run into a lot of crazy little things all the time that I have to find solutions for. And so what I've decided to do is start capturing some of that as I work and share it with you guys in the Facebook group. So that beyond just what you're getting through the seminars, you're also going to get probably a semi-steady stream of these pickup videos that'll give you just quick tips. Instead of being a long seminar, these will give you quick tips into little things that I run into that you might run into sometime as well. So let's see. River asks, would you sell the scarred version separate? You know that you could, but I personally wouldn't. I prefer, I don't know, I'm kind of a bang for your buck kind of guy. I like to have, I like to provide as much value as I can for my customers. So yeah, and it only took a few minutes to create, so it's you know, it's really not. I wouldn't necessarily do it. Now, something I do want to include. One of the things that I'm going to include next time, and I think that, let's see, yeah, the next session is really going to bring it all together, and I'm definitely going to troubleshoot the hiccup that I ran into today with iRay. That's going to be fixed before next time. That was a real embarrassment. But the next session is really going to be about the final polish on a big character set like this. Okay, so here we've gone start to finish on a lot of clothing. There's a lot of clothing, a lot of cool elements added into this. We've gone from concept to completion on a number of pieces of clothing that really can be used to mix and match together to create all kinds of cool stuff. Now we've gone through poly painting and sculpting, creating textures and a morph that corresponds with them. So all that's going to be available here in a day or two as the freebie. Which is it's kind of cool too. You know, that all of the stuff that we give away with these, they go through testing just like any other product at CGBytes. So once these get through testing, then they'll be made available as the freebies for you guys. Then next week, there's a couple of things that I want to add that are just kind of a neat trick to add on top of here using geoshells. Geoshells are kind of a misunderstood thing sometimes. There are some things like I would really like to add some wounds to him and maybe some battle scarring on a piece of armor or the helmet, some stuff like that. And I want to show you guys some ways to do that with geoshells that are just really, really neat. Really cool stuff, really neat stuff. So we're going to touch on that next week, and we'll be bundling all that together. Like I said, I'm going to do a quick session next week on using geoshells to add a couple of wounds, and then you'll see the rest of the kit polished, and I'm going to take you through some stuff about rendering it so that you could render some nice promo images, get some nice artwork for yourself out of it. Thus, you know, I'm going to make sure that iRay is solid for next week. So, and that really will bring this whole character creation to kind of a head. So I've got a number of subjects lined up for after this that people have requested. I actually need to take a look back through my notes and see if there's anything else that we need to touch on with this. But I think that next week should round this out. As we finish it, put the last polish on it, get some renders with it, add a couple of geoshells for another little bonus piece of like some wounds and stuff like that. So that pretty much brings us to a close for today. Let's see. River, yeah, you'll get to see what this looks like rendered. Once I don't want to spend too much time troubleshooting that with everybody live here, because that's just, you know, that's a hiccup in things that is, you know, something that I have to deal with and get fixed and all that. But as soon as it's fixed, I'll be sharing some renders, and I'll post them into the Facebook group. You guys can see the results. I think you'll be really, like, I kind of know what my results are going to be because I'm used to doing it. But it'll be really cool to show you guys what this is going to look like. I think it'll be pretty badass with the scarring and everything in place. So anyway, if anyone has any questions here, as I bring this to a close, please go ahead and post them into the chat. As always, I want to thank CGBytes for providing, you know, I guess the support and the backup with Terry and Loki manning the chat and talking to everybody. Remember, I've been talking about it a little bit. Remember the Facebook group, and also, you know, I really want to see, and I'm going to be checking up on this week. I mean, this is something that's going to start becoming a real priority for me now that we've gotten this far through these seminars. Is I really want to follow up with you guys. I want to hear from you. I want to talk to you. I want to find out where you're at with doing products. So up to this point, and this is also kind of giving you a preview of where things are going. Okay, as we finish out the year, of course, you know we're deep into November now, and as we finish out the year, we're going to these weekly seminars are going to keep rolling through mid-December, and then as the year finishes out, we have plans to kind of shake things up a little bit, and there's going to be some announcements that we'll be making about that as things move forward. But I can tell you to expect in the new year some of the changes that we make to how this all works and what we're doing with all this are going to become much more hands-on for the folks attending. And particularly for folks who are actively selling content at CGBytes. You know, the folks at CGBytes have been good enough to put this together and ask me to host and teach and do all this stuff. But you know, we there is definitely a need there. I really like to see, you know, you folks bringing some product to CGBytes. I think that would be a really cool thing. And you know, it's a great store. It's great people to work with, and so I'm going to be kind of following up on that a little bit and checking up with everybody and say, hey, you know, have you brought anything on board yet? If not, why not? Let's talk about it and see what we can do to get you in. And if so, let's see how it's doing. Let's see, you know, I want to see what you're doing if you're cool with that. Share, you know, message me on Facebook. I mean, I already get a lot of messages from people anyway. A lot of people here, so it's not like this is something new. But I want you guys to talk to me. Show me your works in progress. Show me what you're up to. Let me help you maybe get a little direction or answer some questions. And you know, let's you know, maybe even help coordinate some of you guys into working together on some projects. You know, because there's no reason that shouldn't happen. And you know, let's show there's a big community out there of people who I know kind of watch this stuff after it's recorded, and there's a lot of people who kind of have an eye turned this way, going, "What are these guys up to over there?" And that's you. That's not me. You know, that's not me. That's not Terry. That's not Loki. That's you guys. That's you. You know, you folks who show up for these things and then learn from it and all that. They're watching you. And I want to encourage you guys. You know, let's show them something badass. Let's show them some really cool stuff. You know, I want to see you guys. Show me what you got. Show me what you're working on. Let me help you push the envelope on that. And let's take what you guys as a group of people are turning out and really make a splash in some things. I think that's quite possible. You know, I believe it's possible, or I wouldn't even be here teaching it, honestly. So I think you guys have so much potential, and the stuff that I see from each of you individually is awesome, and has so much potential to it. I can't wait to see that stuff come aboard CGBytes and get released and get in the hands of users, so then you guys can generate revenue from it and see people using it in their artwork and all that cool stuff that goes with it. So you know, there's just a really cool experience to be had out of doing this, and I want to encourage you guys to share that with me and let me help you make the most of it. So anyway, that's kind of my ending spiel for today. I'm going to take a quick look at the chat. And let's see. Cool. Again, thanks to everybody for coming out. Thanks Terry and Loki for the support on this. Thanks to CGBytes. Great place to be. I am Les from 6S1 and the Director of Artist Development at CGBytes. And thank you all. So until next time, we'll see you next Friday. In the meantime, keep an eye out on the YouTube channel and or the Facebook group for the pickup videos that I'll be releasing during the week. So until next time, we'll see you guys.